Hello, hello, beautiful people. Welcome to Beyond the Pages, a podcast hosted by yours truly, Nisha Gupta. For those of you that are new here, every week there's a new episode where we pick a new book, we ask a question about the book, we answer the question ourselves, and then I'll give a quick synopsis about the book. We'll delve into certain themes about the book, and then we'll re ask the question at the end again, and we'll see if we still have the same answer. Excuse me. So let's get started. Today's book is A Clockwork Orange by Anthony Burgess. For those of you who haven't read this book, it is a scientific fiction sort of dystopian novel, and it is about a group of people who their whole lives has been surrounded by ultraviolence. And the leader of this group of people, of this gang, who also in the book known as Druges, is Alex. And Alex basically, he gets caught committing violent acts and he ends up going through this period of reformation slash rehabilitation. Something to note about this process that he goes into is that he was sort of tricked into it. He wasn't really aware about going into this process, and I'll expand a little bit more further on when we go into our analysis of the book. But yeah, if you guys are interested in reading the book after this podcast, I think it would really suit people who like reading about themes such as freedom of choice, determinism, and also possibility of redemption. Something that I think is unique about this book is that the main character, Alex, it's very obvious that he starts out as an antagonist, but by the end, I know some people who think he still does remain an antagonist, but other people that might consider him a protagonist instead. So yes, let's get on into it. To set the stage up, I'm first going to talk about Alex's moral choices in regards to crime and violence. And then I will segment into sort of the rehabilitation, reformation process that I was talking about earlier, which will then lead us to the end, talking about control of the state, aka the government in this book, and how whether the state creates a dysfunctional society or a functional society. So let's get on into it. So first point is moral choice. Now, I'm going to read a quote out loud, and it may be a little bit confusing at first because this book was written in a sort of made-up language, which is it's called Nadsat, and it's a mix between Russian and English, I believe. But we'll be decoding the quote after, and we'll be picking it apart. So don't worry if you're a little bit confused at first, because you will sort of understand it better after we decode it, obviously. But yeah, so here's the quote. Then we smashed the umbrella and razzed his platies and gave them to the blowing winds, my brothers, and then we'd finished with the starry teacher type feck. We hadn't done much, I know, but that was only likely the start of the evening, and I make no apologies to three or thrine for that. So I know you probably didn't understand anything that I just said. So let me give a quick sort of translation about what this quote is talking about. So this is Alex, the narrator of the book, talking, and he's saying that basically there was this like old, unaware teacher type of man. You know, he might have been a professor of some sort. And they took his umbrella and they smashed it and they cut up his clothes and they let it fly away in the wind. And he's saying that they hadn't really done much, right? Like they could have definitely done worse, and that this was only like the start of the evening, and how he's never going to apologize he's never like going to apologize for doing that. He doesn't think that he needs to apologize for doing that, and he's very proud of doing this. So that's basically what the quote is saying. I think what's important about this quote and Alex's moral choice is that he isn't committing these acts of violence as if he's unaware that what he's doing is bad. He's very well aware that these actions are bad. He's saying that this is only the start of the evening and that what they did wasn't, that they hadn't really done much. Like they could have done worse. So he's aware that he could have done something worse to this old man, that he just beat somebody up, and that more violence is going to come after that. So that's a little background on Alex's sort of his personality, the way he carries himself. So we know that Alex isn't a good person. We know he's a bad person. Eventually, his friends, which, like I said before, his gang, they're known as Drooges, some of them end up becoming cops and actually end up arresting him, even though they themselves helped participate with Alex in, excuse me, trigger warning, raping people, looting, robbing, all these different acts of violence, and they end up throwing him into jail. Now, Alex isn't having a good time in jail. He is hating it here. He wants to get out as soon as possible. And somebody comes up to him, this government doctor official, and they're like, you know what, we're going to let you out, but you have to do this favor of letting me try this quick little study technique on you. It's not going to be that bad. It'll be quick. It'll be harmless. And then you're going to be up and out of here. So, excuse me, they sort of manipulate him, and now I'm now segmenting into the idea and theme of rehabilitation and reformation. But basically, they're kind of manipulating him into participating in something called um uh, sorry, I don't know if I'm saying this right, Ludovico's technique, which is basically aversion therapy. So they manipulate him into participating in aversion therapy. And a quote from the doctor, he says to Alex, "You felt ill this afternoon," he said, "because you're getting better. When we're healthy, we respond to the presence of the hateful with fear and nausea. You're becoming healthy, that's all. You'll be healthier still this time tomorrow." So I know it may sound a little bit confusing at first because basically the aversion therapy that Alex is going through is they tie him to a chair and they force his eyelids open and they make him watch continuously hours and hours and hours on end all these violent films. And basically, excuse me, by the end of this by the end of this process, whenever Alex sees anything, the smallest bit of violence, he becomes, in the quote unquote, hateful with fear and nausea. And basically, this doctor is implementing this technique and trying to tell Alex that now he's going to become a normal human being. Because a normal human being, when you see something that is violent, something like somebody robbing somebody or anything of that sort, you would feel bad. You wouldn't feel good. You might feel nauseous. You might be scared. What if they rob me? So yeah, I think what is really important about this, when I said earlier about how they tricked him into doing this, is that Alex will become so sick and nauseous to the point where he literally will not be able to defend himself. If somebody comes up and tries to rob him or anything of that sort, which he does when he gets let out of prison, he does, in his mind, he thinks about inflicting some sort of violence on someone, but he isn't able to do it. Literally immediately as he thinks about it, he becomes sick and nauseous, and he isn't able to defend himself. And I just personally think this isn't a good method because even though Alex participated in extreme ultraviolence, he doesn't deserve to be defenseless, number one. And number two, these doctors didn't tell him the whole truth. This aversion therapy is basically taking away his free will. And in a way, I believe this exhibits the theme of determinism. So, for those of you who don't know what determinism is, it is basically the idea that, everything is predestined. Everything happens for a reason. You can't control anything, it's just destined to be. And that's what I believe this aversion therapy that they perform on him is that they're forcing him to be good. That's his role. They're taking away his free will. And what I believe is also important is that even though Alex is good on the outside, he isn't good in the inside. It's all a facade. It's just because he can't perform acts of violence in his head, he's still thinking about how he wants to harm this person, harm that person. And it's all a facade. So I don't believe this rehabilitation method is a good idea. This reformation, I don't think, is pure reformation. And segmenting onto the third and last main point about state control is that the reason that aversion therapy was performed on him, it was because of the state, the higher government, they wanted to do this on him. And they wanted to create a better functioning society. And even though initially that may seem like a good idea, I actually think it's a horrible idea because Alex was just one person. But if you do that to everybody in prison, you're just creating a group of people who will end up being defenseless. And eventually, one group of people are going to become stronger than the other. And I think there can be a more peaceful way of rehabilitation, but instead the government chooses just to go straight through the path of punishment by forcing him to watch these horrible films. And I don't believe it's right for them to take away one's fundamental human right of free will. I don't think it's right to take away free will to justify a quote unquote perfect society, because at the end of the day, it isn't a perfect society at all. You're leaving one group defenseless against a group of people that can defend themselves. And near the end of the book, Alex realizes that he's just a tool to the state for propaganda, and he tries to even kill himself. And when you think about it, obviously, when you lose your chance, when you lose your freedom of free will, you lose all sense of individuality, which I also don't believe is correct. And even though one could say that taking away Alex's free will benefit society and make society better, which I do understand that argument. But I think a question to ask is, who exactly has that right to take away his free will, though? Does the doctor really have that right to take away his free will? Does the state really have that right to take away the free will? At the end of the day, we're all humans. All humans should be treated equally. And does it really make society a safer place? I don't think it would make society a safer place, because if this is performed on everybody, like I mentioned before, you're just creating an imbalance between two groups of people, if that makes sense. And I don't think it was right that the government had tricked him into participating in this aversion therapy. So when I revisit the question that I had asked earlier, right? I said, is it better for a person to be naturally evil or forced to be good? And originally I said, yes, I think it is better for a person to force to be good. Even though it took me some time. When I first read this book, it really made me think about which side I would pick. And after this in-depth discussion about the book and about its different themes and the different quotes that I mentioned, I think in this situation it's better for a person to naturally be evil, even though I don't want evil to be amongst the streets, especially the streets that I'm in, that my family is in. At the end of the day, I genuinely think that free will is a fundamental human right. Everybody has the right to have a free will, and nobody should take that away, especially through tricking somebody into doing something such as like this extreme form of aversion therapy of forcing somebody hours on hours on hours on end to watch hateful films that will make them, feel nasty. So, yes, basically, that is the end of this podcast. And I encourage everybody to read this book for themselves, to drop down in the comments what they think the right answer is. Do you think it is better for a person to be naturally evil or forced to be good? That everybody has their own opinion. And yeah, I'd love to hear your opinion. Nisha Gupta signing off. Bye.